The engine had been dead for 11 days. 3 senior engineers had walked away from it. 2 consultants had flown in from Germany, examined it for 4 hours, spoken to each other in the low, careful voices of men who do not want to say the word impossible out loud, and then flown home. The biggest race of the year was 72 hours away, and the GT9 sat in its bay like a sealed room no one could find the door to. Then, at 2 in the morning, a man named Joel crossed the yellow tape. He had no business being there. He held a Level 2 maintenance badge, which meant basement access, engine fluid checks, and tire rotation on the secondary fleet. He was a general mechanic, a single father, a man whose daughter packed her own lunch most mornings because he left before she woke up. He had no engineering certification beyond the standard safety card clipped to his badge. He had no authority to touch the GT9. He touched it anyway. By 6:40 in the morning, the engine turned over. The idle was smooth. The pressure readings were exact. Joel packed his tools, took the service elevator to the basement, and started his regular shift. He was fired by 10. Naomi Hargrove had run Pinnacle Motorsport for 22 months. She had inherited it from her father, who died when she was 29, and she had spent those 22 months learning the difference between the authority she had been handed and the authority she would have to earn. The company was worth $1.8 billion. It employed 400 people. It had won more championship titles than any domestic team in the last 15 years, and the night before she signed Joel's termination notice, she had watched the security footage 4 times and still could not name what she saw in the way he moved through that restricted bay. Not hesitation, not caution, recognition. She signed the notice anyway, because Richard, her chief operating officer, had placed a liability argument on her desk that was technically airtight, and because she did not yet have enough information to know what she was missing. She was about to learn. Joel's apartment was small and clean. There was a drawing on the kitchen wall, technical lines rendered in pencil with the precision of someone transcribing something they already knew, not designing it but remembering it. His daughter, Bea, was 7 years old and had a habit of namming her stuffed animals after car components. Her current favorite was a small fabric bear called Piston, who she carried everywhere and consulted on most decisions of consequence. When Joel came home at noon that Tuesday, Bea looked up from her drawing of what appeared to be a racing car piloted by a rabbit and said, "You're home wrong." "Wrong time," he agreed. "Did something happen at the cars?" He sat across from her and thought about how to answer with the honesty she deserved and the simplicity the moment required. "I fixed something I wasn't supposed to fix." "Did it work?" "Yes." She thought about this. "Then why are you home wrong?" He didn't answer immediately. She accepted the silence the way she accepted most of his silences, not as absence, but as the sound of a man taking something seriously. "We'll find something new," he said. She nodded. "Will it have cars?" "Every good place has cars." That evening he made dinner, watched her eat, read to her from a book about engineering that she had declared her favorite because it had diagrams, and waited until she was asleep to sit at the kitchen table and open his phone. There was a number he had not dialed in 6 years. He stared at it for a long time. Then he dialed. 3 rings, then a voice he would have known anywhere. "You fixed the car," said the voice. "I saw it on the morning diagnostic." "Hello, Frank," Joel said. Frank Osa had been the workshop chief at Pinnacle for 26 years. He was 61, built like a man who had spent those years lifting things heavier than any machine was supposed to be moved by one person, and he had known who Joel was from the second week of his employment on the basement level. He had said nothing. Joel had asked him to say nothing. Frank had honored that, the way certain men honor certain debts, quietly, completely, without requiring explanation. "The car runs cleaner than the day it was tested," Frank said. "Isaac doesn't know where to put himself." "Isaac's a good engineer. He's working from the wrong documents." A pause. "I know." "Come back, Joel. They fired me this morning." "I know that too." Back at Pinnacle's headquarters, Naomi Hargrove could not sleep. She stood at the window of her office on the 14th floor at 11 at night, looking down at the workshop bay where the GT9 sat, and she kept returning to the same image from the security footage. The way the man had placed his hand flat against the engine housing before he opened anything, not checking a surface temperature, not locating a component, just listening. The way her father used to stand at the beginning of a rebuild with his palm against the metal and his eyes closed, a habit he had never explained and she had never asked about because she thought she had more time. She turned from the window and went to find Frank. He was in the lower workshop, eating a sandwich at midnight, which she suspected was not unusual for him. He looked up when she came in and did not seem surprised. "Did you know who he was?" she asked. Frank set his sandwich down. "From his second week." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because he didn't want me to." He looked at her evenly. "And because there was a reason he came back without a name and a title. I thought he deserved the chance to decide when to be known." She pulled a stool from the wall and sat down. The workshop smelled of metal and oil and the particular staleness of a room that worked too hard for its ventilation system. "Tell me." Frank was quiet for a moment. Then he said, 8 years ago, your father found a 22-year-old on a technical engineering forum. Self-taught, no degree, no credentials. He had posted a load distribution solution to a problem that 3 university-trained engineers had publicly said was unsolvable. Your father called it the most elegant mechanical reasoning he had seen in 30 years of building cars. He paused. His name was Joel Adeyemi. He came here, quit school, and in 4 years he designed 9 engine variants. The GT9 was the last one. Naomi's hands were still in her lap. What happened to him? His wife died, car accident. Their daughter was 14 months old. Frank's voice did not soften around the fact. He walked out one afternoon and didn't come back, left everything on his desk. Your father was already sick by then, and there was a great deal of confusion about who owned what and who decided what, and Joel just, he paused, disappeared. Nobody looked hard enough. And the drawings. The original handwritten design documents. The GT9 blueprint with his name in the corner. They were on his desk when he left. He did not say Richard's name. He simply looked at her steadily, the direction of his meaning clear as a line on a technical drawing. The simplified version that's been in circulation for 8 years has a component missing. A secondary seal ring in the tertiary pressure assembly that Joel added by hand during the first test run and never formally documented. Meant to write it up later. Later didn't come. And if no one catches it, the system runs fine for years, then it fails at speed. The silence that followed had weight. Your driver is 26 years old, Frank added. Marcus. She stood without another word. Naomi went to the archive room on the 3rd floor, a space most of the current staff had never entered, lined with flat files and document boxes, and the accumulated paper record of a company that had started as a single workshop with a man who believed American engineering could compete with anyone. She found her father's personal storage cabinet. The combination was her mother's birthday. He had used the same combination his entire life and had never once worried whether that was wise. Near the bottom of the last drawer was a flat cardboard envelope, sealed with tape gone yellow at the edges, the return address reading J. Adeyemi, postmarked 5 months before her father's death. She opened it. The handwriting was precise and unhurried. No flourish, no appeal, just the clean, direct lines of a man who said what he meant. I heard you aren't well. I don't expect a response. But if Naomi ever needs someone who knows the GT system from the original engineering logic, I still have every measurement. I'm not asking for recognition. I only want to know the car is safe. The driver deserves that. J.Lo. Naomi sat down on the floor of the archive room with her back against the shelf and the letter in both hands. Her father had kept it. He had locked it away, which meant he had read it, which meant he had intended to act on it, and he had run out of time before he could. She thought about all the things her father had begun that he hadn't had the chance to finish, and she thought about a man who had lost his wife at 22 and come back 8 years later without asking for a single thing, just to keep a car from killing someone on a racetrack. She pulled the current GT9 engineering files on her tablet and put them beside the photograph she had taken of the original drawing from the archive, the handwritten set with the fine technical notations in the margin and the initials in the corner. The secondary seal ring was there in the original. It was absent in every version that came after. And the chain of internal emails from 8 years prior, authored by Richard, told her exactly how that had happened. He had submitted the simplified design to the board under collective attribution. He had watched it propagate through the company's systems for 8 years. He had known the moment Joel walked in with a false surname on a thin resume exactly who he was looking at. He had approved the hire not out of carelessness, but out of calculation. A maintenance worker with no title and no standing was removable. He had engineered the removal the moment it became convenient, using a liability argument that was legally sound and morally hollow. What Richard had not calculated was that Naomi Hargrove would go looking for something no one had looked for in 8 years. She called Richard to her office the following afternoon. She did not schedule it through his assistant. When he arrived, she was standing at the window with her back to him. 3 items were on her desk. The first was the original GT9 drawing with Joel's initials in the corner. The second was Richard's email chain from 8 years prior. The third was a paper napkin, yellowed at the edges, with a load distribution sketch in pencil and the same 2-letter mark. Frank had kept it in his wallet for 8 years in the uncelebrated, total way that certain men hold proof of things that should not be forgotten. The licensing deal with the European consortium, Naomi said, still facing the window. It's terminated. The GT9 design intellectual property cannot be licensed by Pinnacle because the original authorship was never formally assigned. The actual designer never signed a transfer agreement because no one ever presented him with one, because no one ever acknowledged that he existed. She turned around. Richard's voice, when it came, was controlled. He abandoned the work. He walked away from a contract. He walked away because his wife died, and he was 22 years old and alone with a baby. Her voice did not rise. And then he came back without asking for anything and fixed the engine that would have killed Marcus at 200 miles an hour if no one caught the fault. Richard left. The door closed with the particular silence of a man who has calculated his remaining options and found them insufficient. If you're still watching, hit that subscribe button, because what happens next changes everything. Naomi drove to Joel's apartment the following morning. The door was opened by a small person in overalls holding a stuffed bear by one ear. "My dad's fixing my car," said B, by way of greeting. Through the open door, Naomi could see Joel on the kitchen floor, cross-legged, with a toy racing car disassembled in front of him and a miniature screwdriver in his hand. He was working with the same quality of attention she had seen in the security footage, the same complete stillness. He looked up when he heard her voice. He was not surprised. He set the screwdriver down, told B to play in her room for a few minutes, and stood. They stood in the small kitchen. She put the letter on the table, the one her father had locked away, the one that had never been answered. He looked at it for a long time without touching it. Then he picked it up and held it the way a person holds something that weighs more than its size suggests. "Why didn't you say anything?" she asked. "When I fired you, why didn't you tell me who you were?" "I didn't come to reclaim anything," he said. "I came because the car needed someone who understood its original design. That's all. The GT9 has a failure mode that no one on your current team can diagnose from the existing documentation, not because they're not capable, because the documentation is incomplete. That's not their fault." He paused. "Marcus is 26. "I know." "Then you know that's the only thing that matters." She sat down at his kitchen table without being invited, without apologizing for it. A moment passed between them, the kind of moment that has no useful category, that exists outside the vocabulary of board meetings and liability reports and termination notices. "Cameron took your drawings," she said. "I know. Did you know when you came back?" "I suspected." I didn't come back for that. He looked at her with the patience of a man who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has made his peace with the weight of it. I came back to fix the seal. She slid a folder across the table. He opened it and read from the first line to the last with the care of someone who does not sign anything without understanding it. She watched him, the thoroughness of it, the unhurried quality that she recognized from watching her father read contracts. Language, her father used to say, is engineering. It does not forgive imprecision. The personal history clause, he said. You decide what's public. I won't put you in front of cameras or press without your explicit agreement. Agreed. But I can't remove your name from the drawings, she said. It was always there. It should have always been there. He was quiet for a moment. He knew I'd come back. My father. He knew. She held his gaze. He knew things he didn't have time to explain to me. I'm still finding them. Joel picked up the pen from the folder's inner pocket and signed his name on the signature line. The same signature that appeared in the corner of the original GT9 drawings. The same two initials, the same angle, the same quiet certainty of a person who has known who they are for a very long time and has simply been waiting for a moment when it was safe to say so. He set the pen down. One condition, not in the contract. She waited. Marcus gets a full technical briefing before his next race, not the maintenance protocol, the original design logic. He deserves to know what he's driving. Done, she said, without hesitation. Bea appeared from her room at exactly the wrong moment, as she tended to, wearing one sock and holding piston by both ears. She assessed Naomi with the frank appraisal of a 7-year-old who has seen enough adults to know the difference between the ones worth talking to and the ones who aren't. Are you the lady from the car place? She asked. I am, Naomi said. Did you say sorry to my dad? Joel looked at the ceiling briefly. Naomi looked at Bea. Yes, she said, I did. Bea considered this. Okay. Then, before disappearing back into her room, she looked at Naomi's jacket. That's a really nice color, and was gone. Joel was almost smiling. It was a careful thing, not quite arrived, but almost there, and Naomi had the impression that those almost smiles were the most honest thing about him. At the door she stopped. There was one thing left to say, and it did not have a clean professional form, so she said it plainly. I'm sorry, she said, for not asking the right questions when I should have. He thought about it with the same seriousness he gave everything. You asked them eventually, he said. That counts. The race weekend came and went. The GT9 ran every lap cleanly. It finished first, Pinnacle's best result in 11 years. The pit lane was loud. The engineers were jubilant. Photographs were taken and projections revised upward. Marcus, standing on the podium with a trophy that was taller than Bea, said in his post-race interview that he had driven differently this season, that he had understood the car in a way he hadn't before. He did not explain further, but if anyone had been standing in the engineering briefing 3 days before the race, they would have heard a quiet man with a miniature screwdriver diagram and a whiteboard full of original handwritten schematics saying, in the particular voice of someone who built a thing from the ground up, this is what the car is capable of, and this is what it needs from you to do it. On Monday morning, Joel arrived at Pinnacle through the main entrance. The receptionist said good morning and used his name correctly. The badge on his chest read Chief Design Engineer. Frank was at the workshop entrance with 2 cups of coffee, holding one out without a word. Joel took it. Isaac came across the floor within 2 minutes, already talking at speed. I read the original documentation last night. I have 23 questions, and I think I've been misunderstanding the load transfer logic for the entire time I've worked here. Joel looked at him, the genuine urgency of a skilled engineer who has just discovered that the foundation of his understanding is deeper and stranger and more precise than he knew, and he felt something settle in his chest that had been loose for a very long time. I have all day, he said. On the 14th floor, Naomi stood at the window and watched them below. Joel and Isaac, seated side by side near the GT9, A fresh set of drawings spread between them, both men leaning in with the posture of people building something rather than reviewing it. Her phone was in her hand. A message had arrived that morning from a representative of a major international racing organization. They had observed the GT9's performance data. They were interested in a technical partnership. They would like to meet with her design team at her earliest convenience. She typed her reply, "We would be glad to meet. Our design team is in the process of re-establishing itself. Give us a little time to get properly oriented." She put the phone face down on the desk and turned back to the window. Below, the workshop was alive with its ordinary noise, the press of metal, the high tone of an alignment instrument, the low hum of something being tested and corrected and tested again. And beneath all of it, steady and exact, the sound of the GT9's engine running precisely as it had always been designed to run. As it had always been capable of running, in the hands of the man who had built it from nothing, who had come back for no other reason than to make sure a young driver on a racetrack had a fair chance to come home. Joel had once told his daughter, sitting at a kitchen table with a picture book open between them, that a gear alone is just metal, that it becomes something only when it meshes with something else. He had not been entirely sure he believed it when he said it. He was beginning to. If this story stayed with you, subscribe so you never miss one. Drop a comment below telling us what part hit you hardest, and share this with someone who needs to be reminded that the people doing the real work are not always the ones with the biggest title. We'll see you in the next one.
Joel.